Okay, so what are we doing today, Cam?
We're strapping me in to go to the movies.
That's right.
Today, we are covering a listener recommendation work of art.
This message comes from Amanda. Hi, Cam and Maggie. I've been loving your Summerween series. I'm a huge horror fan and also think summer is the worst. She capitalized the worst. I liked that. I particularly enjoyed your episode on funny games, and I think it would be fun for you both to cover a more classic home invasion movie, Mike Flanagan's Hush, especially since you've mentioned being big fans of The Haunting of Hill House and other Flanagan projects. This movie seems right up your alley. Hope you guys enjoy. Amanda. So thank you, Amanda. This one's been on our list for a while anyway. And remember when we did our funny games episode, which y'all should listen to. It was a fun time. The reason we watched that movie was because I was like, I want to watch a home invasion movie. And then we watched the most upsetting movie that's ever been made. So this one sounded great because it was like, much more like normal home invasion. I mean, as much fun as Funny Games was, it was very different. So anyway,
and we loved Hill House and Bly Manor and Gerald's Game and Dr. Sleep and Oculus and all the other Flanagan.
Did we love Dr. Sleep?
I was tossing it in.
I know. It was fine.
We've loved a lot of the other Mike Flanagan projects. Yeah. And this one is sort of a missing link in that it came out before all of those things.
Yeah,
This is 2016. Mm-hmm. And so it's directed by Mike Flanagan and written by Mike Flanagan and Kate Siegel, who's also the star of the movie.
Yes.
And she's in most of his projects.
Yeah.
So this movie is an hour and 22 minutes. I always want to mention that because I think the greatest horror movies are usually right around an hour and a half.
Yeah,
usually a little shy.
I agree.
So yeah, this is a more straightforward. Well, I don't know. Let's start there. So we're not going to do a recap. It's a horror movie. Go watch it. It's an hour.
Are we going to spoil this movie? I think it's important to establish that. I can get away with not spoiling the ending. I might spoil some elements, but I can not spoil the ending.
I'll signpost it when I spoil it. It's fine.
Yeah.
So the elevator pitch is that the movie stars an author who is home alone. She lives alone. She is deaf and mute, and there is a killer outside.
Yeah. Super simple. I love how simple the concept is. I think that's one of my favorite things about this. It's not trying to do anything crazy or it's just an interesting concept, and it's like something that you've seen before but haven't quite. Like I haven't, like the deaf element is new for me, right? But like the Home Alone in the Woods is pretty typical. But adding that little spin not only makes it different, but also gives Flanagan and Kate Siegel, like it gives them a creative limitation, which I think always makes for really fun projects.
I like doing the Summerween thing because as we watch more horror movies in a row, I think we build a conversation out of the themes and differences between those movies. So I want to jump off for a second. Our conversation about Sinister a couple weeks ago. One of the things I kind of walked through in that conversation was the theatricality of Sinister. And there's a different but similar type of theatricality to Hush. I wrote down a couple of those elements. It's mostly a silent film. Because the character can't hear or can't speak.
There's not much dialogue,
And that's like the first piece of trivia on IMDb, that there are 70 minutes of this with no dialogue at all.
Yeah, right.
So it's mostly a silent film. And what that means functionally is that there's a lot more acting going on.
Yes, right.
It's not just, clunky dialogue signposting you through the plot.
Right.
It's a lot of facial acting. There's much more of a physical performance going on to convey characterization and feeling and emotion.
Yeah, Kate Siegel does so much acting with just her face. Because, like, she can't even scream. Like, her character's thing is that, like, her vocal cords are, like, ruined. Like, she can't do anything. She can only, like, breathe and move her face. So the acting that she does is really impressive.
And it's not a supernatural thing. It's not a special effects movie at all.
No, not really. I mean, there's some, like, makeup effects, but, with blood, but that's it. Yeah.
It's a very tiny cast. It's only 5 people. There's one set. I mean, this could be a stage play, basically.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or a classic silent film. It's got that blunt simplicity that makes it theatrical. And I mean, like we talked about in the Sinister episode, horror is maybe the only genre in modern filmmaking that can be patient and show people completing an activity.
Yeah.
Show someone walking across a hall and making breakfast or thinking about something. And you can have those longer takes and longer kind of fleshed out character moments because there's something freaky happening in the background. Or
Right.
you know something's about to happen.
Yeah, so you get both a character moment and also like the fun suspense part.
Right, versus this kind of delirious collage of action shots and VFX and Marvel shit. There's just
Right.
It has that sort of timeless patience to it.
Yeah.
And like other kind of horror classics you and I love, Saw comes to mind, the scrappiness of this movie.
Totally.
Being basically one set and having a couple characters bouncing around in that. This movie, I mean, as much as I enjoyed it just as a pseudo-slasher home invasion kind of combo, it's a great example of horror movies as puzzles.
Yeah.
In that I felt it was... I'm glad I watched it with you because it was very involving as an
Yes.
audience member.
Yes, because like you're working along with Maddie trying to figure out how she's going to survive and like what she's going to do next. And that's something else that I loved was that the way we were able to track Maddie's thought process and like how she's working out what to do, I thought was really great because she can't talk to herself because number one, no one does that. Number two, she literally can't because she's mute. But also like it wasn't like, I mean, there was a little bit of her talking in her head and a little bit of like thinking ahead at different scenarios. But for the most part, you just are able to see what she's trying to do just with the actions that she's doing. And also she's following a really natural way of responding. Like, well, I should hide. I should put the dresser in front of the door. Like very normal things like how I would probably react in this situation, you know?
And the conversation with the friend at the beginning, it does a really quick, potent job of making us empathize and emotionally invest in Maddie.
Yes.
But then most of the movie is driven by our brain's investment. I feel like my brain was going the whole time I was watching the movie.
Yes.
Between the knife, the crossbow, the flashlight, the phone, we're right there with her developing this like Batman utility belt of resources.
Yeah.
Recontextualizing all of these items we got used to in the house as tools to help her survive.
Yes.
And
right.
when you're writing, especially a survival story like this, the story has to be at least as smart as its audience, or it utterly fails.
Right.
Which is sort of the cliche and maybe the stereotype about slashers or modern slashers is that they're all dumb. Why would the people run back into the spooky haunted barn?
Yes.
There's obviously a guy in there with a chainsaw.
Yeah. Right.
So these survival stories have to be at least as smart as the audience.
But it can't be like so smart that you don't believe it. And like the protagonist can't be in complete control of themselves because they're panicked and terrified. So I think this movie balanced those things really well.
And there's such a thin line between something feeling totally underbaked or utterly overwritten. And this, I really feel like, I mean, as usual for a Flanagan movie, it nails that balance.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring in sort of a comparison from another medium to explain this idea. So the original Doom game in the 90s, kind of the first first-person shooter, which revolutionized games. Up until then, it was like Mario shit, you know, Pac-Man.
Yeah, side scroller, yeah.
So Doom was, you were controlling it, you're walking through an area and shooting stuff, and it's much more scrappy and practical and lived in, being that 3D first-person thing. The creators of that game, who pushed an entire medium light years forward, have some pretty fascinating quotes about game design. And I've listened to a bunch of interviews and stuff just because I find it pretty inspirational. And there's this idea that I was reminded of when I was watching this movie. They always privileged the idea of curiosity. So if you're in this constrained level of a game, but you can see out a window, you can see a castle in the distance or some lava or something outside, the player should be able to go everywhere they can see. That was the design kind of principle and philosophy when they made Doom. So you end up getting to go everywhere you can see. Your curiosity is rewarded, which means when you explore kind of a side path or a road. There's always something at the end of it.
Nice.
To encourage and cultivate and reward that curiosity.
Yeah, and to make it feel real and lived in, like an actual universe. Yeah.
Right, because in real life you could go there. You could chase the horizon.
Yeah, it's not beyond the boundaries of the game's map. Yeah.
Which means that the game is extremely dense. There's so many little secrets and opportunities and hidden little nooks and crannies that people are still finding. So that idea of if you show it to the player, you must let them go there eventually. I feel like there's a similar kind of bucket list mentality in a home invasion or a slasher movie.
Yes.
Where there are all of these tropes or expectations. And at the beginning, as I settle into one of these movies, it almost feels like a multiple choice test. Where which options is this one going to choose?
Yes, which room is she going to hide in, and which object is she going to use as a weapon? Which thing is he going to use to try and break in? Yeah.
What type of masked killer are we going to get this time?
Right.
And there's an implication there, if you take that idea of a multiple choice test, that each movie in this genre just fills it out a little differently, and maybe there's one perfect combination.
Yeah.
Or you just want to see something new and exciting. And the sort of Flanagan pivot here, and he's so good at making things fresh again in horror, is to almost check everything off on the list and fill in every bubble on the Scantron.
Yes.
He goes everywhere. Here are a couple examples. We get to fight a masked killer, which invokes a Halloween comparison.
Totally.
The shape is what Michael Myers is credited as in the first Halloween movie. Here, the killer's credited as the man. But later, you also get to fight him unmasked.
Yeah.
You play the other side of that coin. You explore the what if. You fill in the other bubbles on that
And you get
answer.
to see him as a person. You see him interact with the neighbor, and so you see like who he is. He's not just a killer. He's just some dude.
Right. You fight him silently as he stalks around the house and watches Maddie. But then you also fight him unmasked. You see his face. You show the killer break into you fight him silently and you have a conversation with him.
Yes.
That was the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
You show the killer break into the house, home invasion movie, but you also show Maddie break out of the house.
Yeah.
And then later you show her break back in.
Yeah,
So
right.
you're playing every side and every possibility of it.
Absolutely,
You get to see injuries on both sides. Spoiler alert for 10 seconds. You get to see both characters die.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting.
Which is very cool.
Spoiler alert over. There's an overwhelming awareness of options, an awareness of the choices that go into making a story like this.
Yes.
And this awareness, as we kind of barrel through the movie, reaches a meta or fourth wall breaking level, like Funny Games, where we got that pause scene.
Yes.
Where the character grabbed a remote and rewound the movie and made things go a different way. Here, we get to see that shock, pivot sideways where everything goes wrong. And then the movie basically rewinds in Maddie's head.
Yes.
And she games out different scenarios.
Yes, which I really liked that because number one, it's kind of like fun and cheating, but in a good way, in the sense that, Flanagan gets to show us all, like, we get to see on screen different cool ways that she could die.
Yeah.
And like see cool effects and stuff and see freaky scenes. Like I went back and watched a trailer and the trailer shows one of the scenes from the imagined possibilities.
Yeah.
So it doesn't actually happen in the movie, but like you still get to see it play out. And then also it helps with her character because she's a writer, and then it ties back to she's got 7 different endings for her book and she's trying to figure out what to do.
It wasn't cheap because it was established properly.
And that's a very like Stephen King-y thing to do, is to make your main character a writer and like dealing with that kind of thing. And Mike Flanagan is famously a huge fan of Stephen King. Mr. Mercedes is on her bookshelf in the scene at the beginning. Anyway.
Dr. Sleep, Gerald's Game.
Yes, exactly.
And the industriousness of this movie, like if I'm going to make a slasher or a home invasion movie, I'm going to make all of them. I'm going to go every single way I could.
Exactly.
But still have a coherent story made up of finite choices at the end.
Yes.
But it feels like he's exploring every nook and cranny of the house.
Yes.
If the house is horror.
Yeah, I mean, she gets to go into every single room in the house.
Right.
And like she hides in all the possible places she could hide. She grabs a knife from the kitchen. She grabs a hammer from underneath the sink. Like she uses all the weapons that a normal person would use in their house. Like she thinks of everything, but in a really like panicked way, and it doesn't take her 5 seconds to figure it all out. She has to take hours to do it.
In a really infectious, contagious, kind of wonderful way, this being written by Flanagan and Kate Siegel, it felt like two people who were really, really excited to make a horror movie.
And who are really big fans of horror movies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that industriousness reminded me of Gerald's Game, which felt like a story that is Stephen King at his happiest.
Yeah.
And because it was another very simple elevator pitch concept led by a wonderfully scrappy woman with a voice in her head with a worrying B-plot about an animal.
Yeah, and she's kind of trapped in a house. Yeah. It's great. That one is really fun. We haven't talked about it on the show, and I don't think we will, but
really enjoyed
that one is really fun. Go give that a watch.
And amidst all of these choices that are being made and these avenues that are being explored, the one thing that caught my attention towards the end of the movie was restraint. The moment that he didn't explore something, or it was basically, there were 3 or 4 moments where the killer would turn and we would see the big tattoo on his neck.
Yeah.
And I was impressed when the credits rolled that we never explored his backstory.
No, right.
He was left murky and mysterious, like the original Michael Myers.
Yeah. He was given a bit more humanity because the mask comes off. You see him interact with someone else. You kind of get a sense of who he is. But still, there's never any motivation explained for why he's there, why he's trying to kill her. Like, they could have so easily made it the ex-boyfriend. They could have made it the neighbor's boyfriend. Like, they could have given it a backstory and made it mean something. But there was literally nothing. It was just, he wants to torture her and then kill her.
And you avoid the pitfalls of lesser slasher home invasion movies of asking why the person is doing this.
Yes.
That never comes up.
Right. She doesn't even ask.
No, the only faint suggestion towards backstory that we get in this movie is seeing the notches on the crossbow, which is an implication that he's done this a bunch of other times.
Yes.
But that's it.
Yeah.
And you assume, I mean, the efficiency with which he kills the friend in the beginning, you assume he's done this before.
Yes. I also loved that. This isn't really a spoiler because it happens early on, but it's like the way that, like, that being the inciting incident, like, she's just cooking dinner and then the friend slams against the door covered in blood. You have no idea what's going on. And then, of course, Maddie doesn't know she's there because she can't hear her. It's like the saddest thing. And it's like so brutal.
It was such
so
a
quickly.
sudden escalation.
Yeah.
It was a really, I mean, this is hard, I guess, when you've seen so many horror movies, but it was a genuinely striking moment of violence that a little bit reminded me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
A little bit, yeah, absolutely.
Where you get that first shot of Leatherface, just the hammer coming down,
and
nuking the boyfriend.
And the crossbow is such an interesting thing because you don't ever see that. Like, what a weird thing for someone to use. And that just adds to, like, the killer's psychopathy, is like he enjoys, like, chasing down somebody with a crossbow. That's terrifying, you know.
And so much of how we see this the man, the killer here, is in the hunt where he's comfortable and he has the upper hand, or later towards the end when he doesn't have the upper hand. But that doesn't tell you much about who he is.
No.
And avoiding the backstory or the flashbacks or whatever, I love that the only characterization, the only kind of curveball that Flanagan and Kate Siegel put this character in to show us who he is or who he really is underneath. The only challenge character-y moment we get from him is the moment of panic when the boyfriend shows up.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of Funny Games a little. Instead of rewinding, if you're looking at that kind of meta remote control, controlling the narrative thing, we almost get a pause moment of the home invasion slasher cat and mouse game where the killer has to, I mean, spoiler, I guess, he pretends to be a cop when a guy shows up to the house.
Right.
And so he's still the killer. He's already taken the mask off outside.
Yeah.
And he pretends to be a cop. He's got the flashlight up and he asks the guy for his ID. And you see how quick the pivot is.
Yeah.
And that, like, we learn how smart he is, but also that he has the same scrappiness that we're admiring in Maddie.
Yes.
We get to see him adapt and play normal, which is something I could never imagine a Michael Myers doing.
Right, exactly.
That's the first comparison you have, when he has a white, blank-faced mask and he shows up outside the house.
Yes, but then to add a more human element to it, again, like, he's still, like, a psycho and, like, there's no reason for him to be there. Like, there's no personal connection. So you get that scariness of the villain part, but then making him a real person who's just, like, good at faking it and thinking on his feet and, like, is accustomed to existing in the world and hiding this really big secret of his. I thought that was really interesting to look at.
It makes him a lot scarier. When I mean, you're keeping him mysterious by not telling us much about him, but that ability to code switch and blend in to the real world, it's a mirage, right? I think the real him is the freaky guy hunting down the women and killing them.
Of course, yeah.
But the ability to mimic the real world and show like, oh yeah, this guy could exist. Maybe he just has a house down the street.
Yeah.
And this is how he interacts with normal people.
Totally, yeah.
When he's not hunting and killing them. It's much scarier when you can show and blend in. And that, as a sort of a statement on the genre, it reminded me a little bit of The Strangers.
It did. This is a lot like The Strangers, yeah. But I think the biggest difference is having the mask removed, and we just get to know the killer a bit more.
The scariest moment of The Strangers, and the thing I think about at least once a week, is when the family asks, why us? Why
are you doing this?
Why are you doing this to us? And they just say, because you were home.
Which shows, scariest thing.
I mean, there's a normalcy there. Does that make sense? Like, it's not a deranged supernatural. Like,
yeah, there's no like, because 30 years ago you did this thing. It's just, it's random.
Right. It's the sense of calm and normalcy and almost logic to it, of just a normal part. Like, oh, just because you're home.
Yeah.
Like, it's so nonchalant that it becomes that much more terrifying.
Yes, right.
And having this guy be able to put this other mask on of being a normal guy, I guess, or just a cop who's concerned about what looks to be a scary situation at this house.
Yeah,
It's so much more unsettling.
Yeah.
And I love that that's the only moment of characterization we really get for this guy. It felt like a really great pivot to avoid the pitfalls of this genre.
Yeah. One of my favorite other like most terrifying moments of The Strangers is when it's that shot of like Liv Tyler is like walking around in her kitchen and you see the guy behind her, but she has no idea he's there and she's just like going about her business. And this of course pays homage to that in the beginning when the killer's walking around the house and she has no idea he's in there because she can't hear him.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was really impressed with. If we're talking about the kind of scantron of all the options you can take in a slasher or a home invasion movie, I'm always waiting for the shot at the end of Halloween where Michael and Laurie are finally in the house together. They're in the same shot. You know, the camera can contain both of them. It's not a cat and mouse thing.
Yeah.
We get the man and Maddie in the same shot like 15, 20 minutes in.
Exactly. Because immediately.
He breaks in and he's just there behind her.
Yeah. And it's so great because he could have killed her immediately, but he chooses not to because he's a psycho and like wants to play with his food. And that's eventually like, because she has that delay, she's able to like, it doesn't go the way he thinks it's going to go.
And I think it's a great bit of writing to do that because that's what you're expecting the end of the movie to be. And if they hit that moment 20 minutes in and there's an hour left, then you have nothing else to wait for. You're completely surprised by everything coming after that. You've almost been satisfied. It reminded me a little of the first scene of the new Top Gun, which I really noticed the second time I saw it. When the first scene is almost a music video. It's like a montage of planes landing and coming off, and they're playing the 80s song from the original movie.
Yeah.
And it's almost placating your expectations or giving you the thing you wanted or that you thought you wanted from a second Top Gun of just a return to what the first one was.
Yeah.
And you get that out of the way. And then the rest of the movie is its own story. I love the idea of zooming through the expectations of a horror movie and then it's just straight curveballs for an hour.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so giving you that at the top is fun. Yeah.
It was a very smart and self-conscious script.
Yeah, totally. I will say I didn't find this movie super scary. The reason that it took me so long to watch this was because I was afraid to watch it, because we've talked before about how one of the scariest things is home invasion because it's real. Like Paranormal Activity doesn't freak me out nearly as much as home invasion because I don't believe in ghosts, right? But like, so I was like very hesitant to watch this, especially because like The Strangers really freaked me out when we watched it. I didn't find this super scary, and I think a big part of that was because the mask comes off so quickly and then he's just a dude. But that also could be my own personal problem because what's his character's name in the newsroom?
Jim,
who's like
Yeah.
this really like nice, like chill guy. So like all I could see was Jim. I mean, the actor was doing a good job. It's not his fault.
Yeah.
But like I was like, oh, he's just a dude. And so it was less scary and enigmatic than a Michael Myers or the people from The Strangers. And so I think this is much more of a thriller than horror.
Yeah.
So I think if you're like, you haven't really wanted to watch Home Invasion because you're afraid or like you're not super into horror, this is a great one to start with because it's still like scary and it's fun, but
Right.
you're not like losing your mind the whole time. Like once you're in it, you're like, oh, and then it's just like a fun puzzle more than anything.
Exactly. It's a puzzle horror, which means it's much more about the tension.
Yeah.
And the swerves.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I wasn't really scared by this at
No.
all, especially after watching something like Sinister a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Or even Funny Games.
Or Funny Games, yeah, which is scary in a really different way.
Funny Games was disturbing. And this
Yes.
wasn't really scary or disturbing.
No.
But I was invested and involved the entire time.
Yeah, it was just like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Which of course Funny Games critiques, and that's also fun to think about. But this was a really fun time. Yeah, I don't have much else to say.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
I thought it was a lot of fun. And I like that creative limitation of she can't speak and there's little dialogue and she can't hear.
Totally, yeah.
I feel like now I need to watch Don't Breathe.
Don't Breathe is great.
Which is about the guy who's blind,
Sure.
but he's the killer, so that's fun. It's also, of course, reminded me of A Quiet Place because, again, it's just having that creative limitation, like where you can't convey your message in the way you normally can in a movie, like removing a whole sense or removing a whole element. Like that's really cool. A Quiet Place is so good.
So is the second
So
one.
is the second one. If y'all haven't watched that, those movies are so good.
And how often can you say that about a horror sequel?
Honestly, yeah.
It's legitimately as good as the first one.
Yeah, Quiet Place, oh man, that's a really good one.
And that one is, I mean, when we saw the second one in theaters, that was absolutely a tension movie.
Yes. Oh man, I was really tense in that one.
The entire time.
Yeah.
There was like a nail-biter thriller.
Yeah.
It was scary, but it was mostly just the tension.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, Hush is great. Give it a watch.
Yeah.
It's a great time.